This show is part of One Place, a daily network of focused briefings across the stories people follow most.
Welcome to our daily roundup. We are tracking a massive shift in national security and domestic policy as the administration navigates a multi-front crisis both at home and abroad. Let's get started.
Trump threatens to obliterate Iranian power plants within 48 hours.
ICE agents head to airports to manage security checkpoint lines.
The president suggests a third term as a deserved reward.
Cabinet members defend Trump's celebration of Robert Mueller's recent death.
U.S. troops express deep reluctance to fight for Israel's interests.
Trump mocks the British Prime Minister using a comedy sketch.
Mixed messages emerge regarding winding down the war with Iran.
Treasury Secretary uses doublespeak to justify escalating the current conflict.
Unions and Democrats warn against using untrained ICE airport agents.
Trump links airport security to a crackdown on Somali immigrants.
First, the Iran ultimatum. Ambassador Mike Waltz made it very clear this weekend that the administration is not ruling out strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. This follows a stark warning from President Trump on Truth Social, where he gave Iran a 48-hour deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. If they don't comply, the president threatened to obliterate their power plants, starting with the largest ones first. Waltz argued that because the IRGC controls so much of Iran's infrastructure and economy, these facilities are legitimate military targets, despite warnings from the UN that such attacks could be war crimes.
The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is critical because it handles about 20% of the world's oil supply. Iran's military has effectively closed it to most traffic for 3 weeks now. Waltz dismissed concerns about the humanitarian impact of hitting power plants, specifically regarding water desalination. He insisted that the Pentagon would ensure targets are geared toward military infrastructure. However, the rhetoric remains incredibly high stakes. By refusing to take nuclear plants off the table, the administration is signaling a total war footing if the maritime blockade isn't lifted immediately by the Iranian regime. Next, the airport crisis.
As the Department of Homeland Security shutdown continues, President Trump has announced that ICE agents will be deployed to major airports starting Monday. The goal is to assist with the massive security lines that have formed because TSA officers are working without pay. Borders Czar Tom Homan confirmed that while ICE agents won't be doing the actual passenger screening, they will take over entry and exit point duties. This is intended to free up trained TSA staff to focus on the checkpoints. However, the move is facing stiff opposition from the union representing TSA officers, who argue their members deserve pay, not replacement.
The logistics of this deployment are still being finalized, but Transport Secretary Sean Duffy suggested that ICE agents have relevant experience because they use similar security machinery at the southern border. Critics are worried about having armed, untrained agents in a sensitive aviation environment. The DHS has been without funding since mid-February after a congressional stalemate over immigration policy. While the administration frames this as using every tool available to help travelers, the union emphasizes that TSA work requires months of specialized training to detect explosives and weapons. It is a high-pressure solution to a growing domestic funding crisis.
Now to the term limits. President Trump has once again floated the idea of serving a third term, sharing an image on Truth Social that described it as a reward for the supposedly stolen 2020 election. This isn't the first time he has toyed with the idea, despite the 22nd Amendment clearly barring any president from serving more than 2 terms. He has previously told reporters that he isn't joking about it and claims that many people want him to stay in office. His ally, Steve Bannon, has even stated publicly that they are actively working toward a Trump 2028 run, treating the Constitution as a secondary concern.
The rhetoric around a third or even fourth term has been a consistent theme since at least 2018. While the president's approval rating currently sits around 41%, he continues to sell merchandise for a 22-8 campaign. Legal experts point out that there is no constitutional path for this without a massive amendment process, which is highly unlikely. Still, the fact that he is framing a third term as a form of legal or political restitution for 2020 suggests he is testing the waters for a significant challenge to established democratic norms. It keeps his base energized, regardless of the legal reality. Moving to the Mueller reaction.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spent his Sunday morning defending the president's controversial comments regarding the death of former FBI Director Robert Mueller. After Mueller passed away at 81, Trump posted that he was glad he was dead. claiming Mueller could no longer hurt innocent people. When asked if this was appropriate for a veteran and public servant, Bessent pivoted to the president's own perceived suffering. He argued that the public cannot understand what has been done to the Trump family over the years. It was a steadfast refusal to condemn the remarks, focusing instead on the president's long-standing grudge from the Russia investigation.
Mueller, a Republican who served under George W. Bush, died after a battle with Parkinson's disease. Despite his role in the investigation that Trump loathed, Mueller ultimately decided not to file obstruction charges and found no criminal conspiracy with Russia. Nevertheless, the president's resentment remains potent. Bessent's defense on Meet the Press emphasized empathy for the president rather than the deceased. This highlights the deep personal nature of Trump's politics, where even the death of a major political figure is viewed through the lens of personal grievance. It signals that the administration will not back down from its aggressive, often personal rhetorical style.
Next, the military's concerns. As the conflict with Iran enters its fourth week, there are growing reports of disillusionment among U.S. troops. Many active-duty soldiers and reservists are expressing a lack of faith in the current strategy, with some explicitly stating they do not want to die for Israel. Advocacy groups have seen a massive spike in inquiries about conscientious objector status, with one group reporting a 1,000% increase in March alone. Troops are reportedly suffering from inadequate force protection as Iranian drones and missiles continue to strike American bases. With 13 deaths and hundreds of injuries already, the human cost is starting to weigh heavily on the ranks.
The stress is particularly high for those being deployed on short notice. Military officials in Germany have noted that the toll from ballistic missile strikes is destabilizing for service members. There is a sense among some that they are being used as political pawns in a war that lacks a clear ground plan or exit strategy. One veteran mentor noted that she has never seen this level of outreach from soldiers looking for a way out of their service obligations. If this trend continues, it could pose a significant challenge to the administration's ability to sustain a long-term military presence or escalation in the Middle East. Now to the UK relations.
President Trump has taken his frustrations with the UK public, sharing a comedy sketch that mocks Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The skit, from a new British show, portrays Starmer as weak and terrified of the American president. Trump's decision to share this with his millions of followers is seen as a direct jab at the Prime Minister's cautious approach to the Iran conflict. Tensions have been high since Starmer initially refused to let U.S. jets use British bases for offensive strikes. Although he eventually relented for defensive missions, Trump has continued to attack him, even saying Starmer is no Winston Churchill.
The sketch shows Starmer literally screaming and hanging up the phone when Trump calls, which clearly amused the president. This public mocking of a key ally during a time of war is unusual and highlights the strained relationship between the two leaders. Starmer is trying to balance the special relationship with domestic concerns about being dragged into a wider war. Meanwhile, Trump is using social media to pressure the UK into more active support. By amplifying content that depicts the Prime Minister as ineffectual, Trump is signaling that he has little patience for anything less than total cooperation from his international partners.
Next, the mixed messages. The administration's messaging on the Iran war has become increasingly contradictory. On Friday, President Trump suggested he was winding down attacks because the U.S. was close to meeting its objectives. He claimed the military had successfully degraded Iran's capabilities. However, just a day later, he issued a 48-hour ultimatum to bomb power plants and ordered more Marines to the region. This back and forth has left analysts and lawmakers confused about the actual goal. While the president talks about peace and winding down, his actions and his request for $200 billion in funding suggest a significant escalation is actually underway.
There is also the issue of oil prices and domestic popularity. Trump recently lifted some sanctions on Iran to ease the global oil supply, even while the two countries are actively fighting. It is a strange dynamic where he is fighting the regime while simultaneously trying to prevent a gas price spike at home. This chaotic messaging might be an attempt to keep the Iranian leadership off balance, but it also creates uncertainty for American allies and the public. Without a clear, consistent policy, it is difficult to see how the conflict reaches a stable conclusion. The administration seems to be oscillating between total victory and a quick exit. Moving to the Treasury's defense.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been tasked with explaining these contradictions, and his defense has raised some eyebrows. He told reporters that the president's threats to obliterate power plants are not inconsistent with the idea of winding down the war. He used the phrase escalate to de-escalate, arguing that a show of overwhelming force is the only way to bring the conflict to a close. Besant also maintained that all options, including a ground invasion of Karg Island, remain on the table. He dismissed concerns about the shifting scope of the war, insisting that the American people simply don't have the right framing of the situation.
This rhetorical strategy attempts to frame aggressive military action as a path to peace. Besant was quite critical of the media's questioning, suggesting that the press is failing to understand the president's unique approach to diplomacy. By claiming that the U.S. is speaking the only language Iran understands, the administration is doubling down on a high-pressure tactic. However, the shift from limited engagement to the possibility of a ground invasion is a major development. It suggests that the initial goals of the war have expanded significantly, and the administration is now prepared for a much larger and more direct confrontation to secure the strait.
Next, the ICE controversy. The plan to put ICE agents in airports is drawing sharp criticism from Democratic leaders and civil rights groups. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries warned that deploying untrained agents could lead to dangerous confrontations or even violence. The ACLU also weighed in, stating that the presence of immigration officers at airports would inspire fear among families and travelers. Despite these concerns, the administration is moving forward, with Atlanta's mayor confirming that agents will be at Hartsfield-Jackson for crowd control. The administration blames the shutdown on Democrats, claiming that the lack of funding has forced hundreds of TSA officers to quit because they can't afford basic necessities.
The union representing TSA workers is particularly vocal about the lack of specialized training for ICE agents. They point out that detecting sophisticated threats at a checkpoint is a skill that takes months to master. Replacing these professionals with armed agents who focus on immigration enforcement is seen as a major security risk. However, the White House maintains that this is a necessary step to keep the country moving during the funding lapse. With Tom Homan in charge of the deployment, the focus seems to be as much on optics and political pressure as it is on actual airport efficiency. It is a high-stakes gamble with aviation safety. Finally, the Somali crackdown.
President Trump has added a new layer to the airport security plan, stating that ICE agents will specifically focus on arresting illegal immigrants from Somalia. He claimed that Somali immigrants have destroyed parts of Minnesota and that the airport deployment is an opportunity to expand his immigration crackdown. This move ties the DHS funding battle directly to his broader immigration agenda. By promising that ICE will do the job better than it has ever been done before, he is signaling a much more aggressive enforcement presence in public spaces. This has further polarized the debate in Congress, making a resolution to the shutdown even more difficult to reach.
The focus on the Somali community follows a controversial crackdown in Minnesota that resulted in the deaths of 2 protesters. Democrats have cited that incident as a reason to demand more oversight and a new code of conduct for federal law enforcement. Trump's latest comments seem to double down on the very tactics that Democrats are opposing. As the shutdown enters its 6th week, the human cost for TSA workers continues to mount, with hundreds quitting and thousands calling out. The president's insistence on using ICE for both security and targeted arrests ensures that the standoff over DHS funding will remain a central conflict in Washington for the foreseeable future.
That wraps up our briefing for today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the day's most critical stories. Follow us for your next daily update.